Hello, this is the Lord's Legion and welcome to a brand new countdown. And in this video we're going to be counting down the top 15 animated comic book shows. And as you can see, this is going to be the 2018 edition, since I have done a similar list years ago. But since this list was pretty difficult to make, I decided to, instead of doing the top 10, I decided to go a step further and make it a top 15. And I hate to disappoint some of you, but Young Justice will not make the cut, mainly because I have yet to see the series. I have seen some clips and I'm sure that the show is amazing, but I cannot judge the show purely on clips alone. So without further ado, let's begin with this list. So kicking off the list at number 15, we have The Batman. Now the only reason why this show is on this list is purely because of nostalgic reasons. And yeah, I can't deny that this show has aged poorly and that the writing isn't the best. But even with that being said, I still think that there are some redeeming qualities with this series. For one thing, the voice cast for the most part are very stellar, and I would even go as far to say that they kinda rival the DC animated universe in some respects. And I especially admire the art style because a lot of the characters do have their own flair, and I do appreciate most of the redesigns. Like I said, what really does hold this series back is the fact that some of the stories are pretty mild at best, but there are some legitimate good episodes that have been sprinkled throughout the series. And sure, The Batman is the perfect example of style over substance, but give credit where credit is due, at the very least this is a somewhat solid series on its own. Coming in at number 14, we have Fantastic Four: World's Greatest Heroes. Now similarly with The Batman, this series is mostly really there for nostalgic reasons because I did grow up with this series, and admittedly this Fantastic Four cartoon is very pleasing to the eye. Now I can't deny that this series does fall victim towards the style over substance, but comparatively to The Batman, I honestly think that Fantastic Four does have stronger writing, and this series perfectly captures the first family. And what I admire about this cartoon in particular is the fact that they took risks with some of its villains. And while I don't think they've nailed everything that they had to do, at the same time I do feel like this animated series is pretty underrated. So for number 13, we have Justice League Action. And yes, everyone knows that this animated series isn't anything high art, but really it's not trying to be. All it's trying to be is a dumb fun action cartoon with heroes facing off against the villains, and for the most part they nail that. And unlike something like Teen Titans Go, Justice League Action is actually very enjoyable to watch. And what I enjoy about this series is the fact that they go out of their way and pay homages and nods towards the broader DC universe. And although it isn't anything high art, at the same time it's not insulting either. So for number 12 we have Ultimate Spider-Man, and just so we're clear, I'm only talking about the final season, because this was when this series really got good. Because for one thing, a lot of the criticisms that many people had about this series thus far, most of it was dropped for this season. And it felt more like an actual Spider-Man cartoon than just Spider-Man meets this hero. And it had a pretty intriguing story arc that went through many twists and turns. Hell, if you didn't like Carnage or Dr. Octopus in this series so far, this season went out of its way to redeem both villains. And it is kind of unfortunate because if this series started off with this kind of writing, then this series as a whole could have been much better received. Because the final season of Ultimate Spider-Man just blows the other 3 seasons that came before. Coming in at number 11, we have Superman the Animated Series. Now truth be told, I am not the biggest fan when it comes down to Superman. Not that I dislike him or anything, but he just doesn't appeal to me that much. But not only did I find this version of Superman to be incredibly charming, but at the same time they went out of their way to maintain the essence of Superman. Because this Superman is hopeful and he's very inspiring. And the way this cartoon represents its villains is very intriguing, the main highlights for me of course being Lex Luthor, Brainiac and Darkseid. And it amazes me that this series went on for so long while maintaining Superman as a really interesting character without necessarily breaking him down. So for number 10, we have Batman Beyond. Now in theory, this whole idea of a teenage Batman in a mech suit that takes place in the future is a really bad idea, but in hindsight they found a way to make this work. And they could have just easily made Terry McGinnis as just a boring character, but in reality this Batman makes it his own. And the fact that Bruce Wayne is mentoring this younger version of Batman is just the icing on the cake. And instead of just making a Scarecrow Beyond or a Clayface Beyond, this series went out of its way to make its own original villains. And when they do bring back old villains such as Bane or Mr. Freeze, they manage to make their appearances mean something instead of being just throwaway cameos just for fan service. And undoubtedly the biggest risk in the DC animated universe more than paid off. Coming in at number 9, we have SpiderMan the Animated Series. Now whether you absolutely love the series or you just find it dated by today's standards, you can't deny that this cartoon is a huge classic. And it's probably the thing that introduced most 90s kids such as myself to the character. And when you do watch this series, it does feel like a comic book coming to life, and they do adapt certain story arcs rather faithfully. Yes, you can poke fun at the fact that they don't do many punches and that the series is heavily censored, but even when you look back at the series many years later, you can still have a ton of fun with this cartoon. Coming in at number 8, we have Wolverine and the X-Men. Now this series was cancelled way too soon, and if it did have another season or two, this could have been in the top 5. And what I love about this series is the fact that they went out of their way to explore the different elements within the X-Men mythos, such as Magneto and Genosha, as well as the Sentinels, and they've even teased Apocalypse for a potential second season. And with all of that stuff going on at once, they still found a way to make it all work. And it was pretty exciting to see some of your favourite X-Men such as Cyclops, Emma Frost, Beast, and there was even a cameo featuring the Hulk. And like I already said, this series was cancelled way ahead of its time, and if we had a second season then we could have seen a full-on Age of Apocalypse storyline, and also the fact that Deadpool is going to be in there at some point as well. Coming in at number 7, we have Justice League and Unlimited. And yeah, I do know that this is a bit of a cheat, seeing as these are two completely different shows, but the way I see it, you can't have one without the other. But to me, it's just exciting to see all of your favourite heroes from the DC animated universe unite as one, such as Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and Martian Manhunter, who is my absolute favourite. And some of the stories are really enjoyable to watch, such as the Injustice League assembling, Lex Luthor fusing with Brainiac, seeing an evil version of the Justice League known as the Justice Lords. To me, this series has it all, and even in today's standards, I still think it holds up rather nicely. So for number 6, we have Teen Titans. Now when I first grew up with Teen Titans, I didn't think it was really that fun, and I honestly thought the art style was a bit too cheesy for my taste, but the more I grew up and watching this series back, the more respect I have for this series as a whole, because it's really something else. Because the Titans themselves are very well defined, and they do have their own character development through each season. And even the art style has grown on me because it's really unique. Hell, even some of the stories are heartbreaking at points, with some top-notch villains such as Slade, Red X and Trigon. And with a potential revival on the horizon, I do suspect that we will finally get to have the definitive ending for these characters that we all deserve. So for number 5, we have X-Men the Animated Series. Oh yes, much like with Spider-Man the Animated Series, the X-Men is pretty dated by today's standards, and some of the dialogue is extremely cheesy. But unlike Spider-Man the Animated Series, the X-Men didn't really shy away from the hard-hitting themes, which kinda strengthens this series on the whole, and not to mention that they do adapt some of the best moments within the X-Men mythos, such as the Dark Phoenix saga, the Apocalypse story arc, and even Days of Future Past. All of these story arcs this series pulled off down to a T. Now yeah, like I already said earlier, some of it doesn't really hold up by today's standards, but because this cartoon was the thing that introduced me to the X-Men, as well as the fact that they didn't really shy away from some of the subject matters that many cartoons would avoid back in them days, you really can't take away the impact that this series had for the X-Men. Coming in at number 4, we have the Spectacular Spider-Man. Now similarly with Teen Titans, I didn't really think the Spectacular Spider-Man was anything special when I first saw it. But looking back on the cartoon as a whole, I can't deny that I really admired Spectacular Spider-Man ever more. Because even though it just feels like within every episode it's just Spider-Man and a different villain, they still managed to find a way to make it interesting by having this universe fleshed out and even making some of the villains all the more interesting, with some overarching storylines to follow. And to me, this is a rare instance in that a certain version of Spider-Man where he is just as interesting with or without the mask. And to me, focusing on Peter Parker is just as important as pulling off Spider-Man, and in my eyes, this animated series more than proves that. So for number 3, we have Spawn the Animated Series. Now when it comes down to animated comic book shows, Spawn is an underrated masterpiece. Because this is one of the rare instances where an animated series actually does the character of Spawn more justice than the actual comics he appears in. Because instead of focusing on the extreme 90s aesthetic of the Spawn character, they instead decided to make him more grounded and make him almost like a ghost. Not to mention that the art style and animation is just absolutely gorgeous and quite possibly the best I have ever seen in an animated comic book series. And I really can't talk about this series enough because it's just that good. And you would have to watch this series yourself to understand why I think Spawn the Animated Series is up there as one of the best. Coming in at number 2, we have Batman the Animated Series. Now I am fully aware that this is going to be everyone's number 1 and I can see why. Because this animated series is just as good by today's standards as it was when it first came out. Hell, I would even go as far as to say that the animation still holds up. And there are so many different reasons on as to why many people believe the Batman the Animated Series is such a phenomenal animated comic book series. Such as the flawless voice acting from Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, as well as some really memorable episodes that stick in your head many years later. And for good reason, because they are very well written, featuring well defined villains and even some heartbreaking moments. And it's really not hard to see why many people deem Batman the Animated Series as their definitive Batman. And finally for number 1, we have Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Now I love this series for the similar reasons as the Spectacular Spider-Man, in that this does have a very well defined universe, as well as the fact that this series does have some overarching storylines that follows throughout the 2 seasons. And what amazes me is that not a single member within the Avengers feels underdeveloped to me. They all have their time to shine and they do have some amazing character development throughout the series. And I especially love the unique animation and character designs, because in a strange way this series embodies both the modern comics as well as the classic comics, which is something that is very tricky to pull off. And for all these reasons and so much more, this is why I personally place Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes as my number 1 favourite comic book animated series. So what is your personal favourite animated comic book series? Comment below and share some thoughts. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video, please like and subscribe, take care and have a good one.